on behalf of the panel, we are extremely thankful to ET for having this brilliant conference. In fact, yesterday we had the Honorable Prime Minister and a whole lot of speakers here. We are pleased to sit down and discuss the topic that is coming. In fact, if you look at this panel, we have people from all over we have people from Canada, from Singapore, from Rwanda, from India, of course, and we have from International Solar Alliance. He represents all countries, not one. And except that there are two announcements. One, Professor Darud couldn't make it, but he has sent Anna here. And number two is that time has been cut down from 1 hour 15 minutes to 45 minutes. So we have to cut down a few discussions that is there. And I would like each speaker here just to take 1 minute and introduce themselves and the organizations they're working. And before we start the questions.
Thank you, Upendra, and thanks to everyone, especially the Economic Times, for making this day possible and for their invitation to be here. My name is Ana Maria Kleymeyer. I work with the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development. We are a legal and technical think tank and research organization based in Washington, Paris, and we now have just recently opened an office here in Delhi. We work on fast action on climate change, leveraging the different opportunities for interventions that actually bring down the near-term warming and the greatest risks involved in climate change. So I'll leave it at that and pass on.
Good afternoon. My name is Ella Kokotsis, and I'm the Director of Accountability for the G7 and the G20 research groups based at the University of Toronto. And I've been involved with these research groups for over 25 years now. One of the main deliverables we have from the research group is to provide annual accountability reports on how the G7 and the G20 leaders do in terms of their summit commitments. So we're going to be looking very closely at the G20 this year under Prime Minister Modi's leadership to assess results of his summit. Thank you.
I'm Hogeveen Rutter. I work in renewable energy and renewable energy integration pretty much my entire career. I'm currently with the International Solar Alliance, which is an organization that promotes solar around the world, and Mr. Tripathy was the inaugural founding managing director of that. And it's a real opportunity, a platform for South-South collaboration and supporting countries around the world to adopt solar power.
Good afternoon. My name is James Laybourn. I'm the Regional Sales Director for DNV Energy Systems in Asia Pacific. It's a real pleasure to be back in India, and thank you to the organizers for having me as a speaker. Briefly about DNV, we are an assurance and advisory company, an independent company supporting the energy transition, primarily in the maritime and energy sectors. We have around 13,000 technical experts around the world, including around 200 here in India. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Josh Whale. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ampersand. We are an electric motorcycle energy company based in Kigali in Rwanda, also in Nairobi in Kenya. I think some of you may be familiar with battery swapping or battery as a service business models. So what we do is if you imagine all of the 100 to 150cc motorbikes here in India on the road, which make up 80% of the world motorcycle market, that's what we focus on. So bigger batteries, heavy duty, a bit different from the hand swapping batteries.
Hello everybody, I'm David Meyer and I'm the CEO of Phinergy. Phinergy is an Israeli-based company from the high-tech industry, and we are working on a new technology which actually is going to be unveiled already in Europe, in Israel, and I hope also here in India, how to create new clean energy. And I'm very honored to be here, and I think my job here is to tell a story. And hopefully the story is very good and everybody would like to support to execute it. Thank you.
Great. That's the icebreaker. You could see how each panelist brings here the best that is to be, given here. Usually we say that Indians do not like to give up the car, the refrigerator, and the spouse. Now, the first two are under attack because the car you may have to give up because it's more than 15 years old, it's not EV. And the refrigerator you may have to give up because it's not Kigali friendly. The third one is not the issue right now. But if you look at the subject, the energy conversation, we would like to keep it simple, informative, and so that the general audience, doesn't get bored because in the post-lunch session, that also we keep in mind. In this session, when you're talking about a green tomorrow, we are going to cover subjects like, the issues of finance and technology, because in India, if you look at the per capita consumption of energy, it is almost 1/3 of the global average, the global per capita. And, when we are heading to be a 5 trillion economy and number 3 in the world, there is a necessity that the per capita consumption of energy goes up. Second thing, if you look at, India is one country which even put a coal cess, and to finance renewable energy projects, because Honorable Prime Minister talked about 500 gigawatt, and that means including the installation cost and the grid cost, it becomes $500 billion. And equity loan, of course, we have 5 private sector finance experts here, so we will be talking about technology, finance. We'll be talking about smart infrastructure in the country, exploring and adopting sources like green hydrogen. Of course, the entire world is moving towards hydrogen economy. There is so many seminars, webinars, projects, and even Government of India have announced the green hydrogen mission. And then as a part of the G20, last week only, the Honorable Prime Minister released something called E20 in India, the biofuel mix, 20% biofuel and 80% petrol. And then we'll also touch on a policy support in boosting manufacturing of PV cells. Even yesterday and today, we are all talking about energy security, which has not only gone to provide sustainable and affordable energy, but also we have to have manufacturing distributed all over. And then we will be touching on new age technological interventions and boost processes. To start with, I'll put one question to Anna. India had a target of 175 gigawatt by 2022, and the figures come that they're somewhere 172 point, putting all the things together. And Honorable Prime Minister has made now a commitment of 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel by 2030. This requires making large-scale investment in India's renewable energy sector, and the industry people who are present here would love to have investment outside, although this sector is open to 100% FDI, and both by way of equities and loans during the next 7 years. That is the 2030, the deadline. As one of the 100, Professor Darur couldn't come. He was one of the 100 most powerful policy influences in Washington. He's known as father of Kigali. But I would like Maria to, you to tackle the same question: how the global industry and the Indian industry can come together. What are your recommendations so that they become effective and united partners in the energy transition process in India? In fact, Honorable PM yesterday announced that you let others join the India's march into progress. So how you think the global industry, particularly American industry and Indian industry, can join together in this transition process?
Thank you, Upendra. So I'd like to approach your question by taking a quick step back and asking, why are we even talking about energy transition? As everyone here knows, the planet is heating up. We are dealing with a global crisis of climate change, and this is what drives us to think about the solutions and figuring out what we're going to do to protect ourselves and to shape a new world. The leading scientific body, global body on climate change has told us that, that climate change is real and that it is accelerating. Not only that, but that the impacts are inevitable. No matter how much we do today to stop greenhouse gas emissions, we are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. And I'm sure that everyone here in this room has either firsthand or read in the media about those impacts. Wildfires, floods, droughts, and the increasing heat waves that almost every region of the world is experiencing to one degree or another with its associated impacts. In India, by 2030, rising temperatures and extreme weather are calculated to jeopardize approximately 150 to $250 billion equivalent in the economy. That's nearly 5% of the nation's GDP jeopardized because of the impacts of climate change. These heat waves in particular are increasing, and India will soon become one of the first places in the world to surpass the limit of human survivability. That means that it will be too hot to sustain life in certain parts of the country. Energy transition in the climate change context means both energy production, looking at how we produce the energy that we need, but also looking at the consumption of energy. What are we using that energy for? To find the most effective and sustainable solutions, we must look beyond just the production to the use. And here I'd like to spotlight a critical priority for addressing the energy transition in India and globally. And this is where the partnerships and the leadership of countries, in particular India, is important. And that is in the cooling sector. And you referred to that when we talked about our refrigerators, how important they are, but also cooling of spaces. As the Indian and global economy and population grow, so does the demand for the critical products and services around cooling. Food, medication, emergency rooms, workspaces, children's classrooms, technology equipment, science labs, and many other spaces and products that we deem essential for our lives, for our livelihoods, for our survival, and also for our economic development. Cooling these spaces is at the heart of our development and our success as a country and as a planet. Staying cool during the extreme heat is about more than just comfort. It draws the precarious line between life and death. Food production and the lack of adequate cold chains results in approximately $1 trillion in economic losses each year and is responsible for 9% of lost GDP. On the flip side, when we strategically design efficient cold chains and our approaches to cooling, we can save food, we can save money, we can increase crop yields and income exponentially for small and large farmers, but as well as for every part of the economy that is involved in sustaining those cold chains. Analysis by the global management consulting firm, Kinsey and Company, shows that lost labor from rising heat and humidity could put up to 4.5% of India's GDP. That's another approximately $150 to $250 billion at risk by the end of this decade. So clearly we have a challenge, a crisis, but also a great opportunity if we look at the sector and everything that, that it offers in terms of opportunities and security for the future. Cooling and heating amount to nearly half of global energy consumption. Half of our energy consumption. That's extraordinary. If we think about that, with solutions in the cooling and heating sector, we can tackle half the problem. We can solve half of this challenge. Decarbonized cooling will help accelerate the clean and efficient energy transition, but it has to be coupled with energy efficiency. And this is where India has shown great leadership in its cooling plans and also in extraordinary steps that it's taking to not only propose solutions, but implement them and show other countries around the world how it can be done and what success looks like. Just taking a quick look at the inefficiencies. Inefficient equipment burdens the national electrical grids, especially during peak hours. when energy companies must draw from the most expensive and highly polluting sources like coal. By improving energy efficiency of cooling, India could avoid the construction of 80 large coal-fired power plants. That's extraordinary. I mean, there are very few other opportunities or solutions that deliver the same amount in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. Cooling equipment also contains hydrofluorocarbons. They're in our refrigerators, they're in our air conditioners. They're a super potent greenhouse gas. But fortunately, through the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment that you also referred to, India is, and the world are on track to phase down this super pollutant. And I would say that India is one of the leaders that is showing, again, the world the pathway to phasing down those super pollutants. Our planet is heating and will likely pass the 1.5 safe temperature limit as early as 2026. I'll repeat that, as early as 2026. That is 3 years from now. What happens after we surpass the 1.5 limit, I don't even want to think about. It's what we're experiencing now tenfold, 100-fold. We don't want to get there. We need the solutions and we need them fast. It's paramount that we get all hands on deck to generating those solutions and putting them in place. Solutions span all sectors of society, but those that build resilience to the inevitable impacts of climate change, in particular to the heating planet, while also offering solutions to avoid those rising temperatures, deserve special attention. Policy, finance, prioritization in both the public and private sectors, coming together and working as a team is essential. That's how we will find our safe future. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, it's bad news. It is sad news that in 2026, we are going to cross 1.5 degree global mean temperature. The whole Paris Agreement was brought to control it, to see that we don't cross 1.5 degrees Celsius. But India, just for taking note that India was the first country in the world which brought in a national cooling action plan, and that now has been taken into many countries. But the main point is that the 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.5 degrees Celsius, the implications are quite severe. And as Anna said, that a large chunk of India's population will be in danger. The coastal belt, the agriculture, the food security, like in many other countries. But global warming as such, it's not merely a story of energy, the green energy we're talking about. It involves sectors like transport, where it's very difficult to electricity to reach out. And it's good that Reliance has got some new technologies now, which talks about retrofitting heavy-duty trucks so that they can use hydrogen. So global, warming is not only about energy, it is also about agriculture, it's about afforestation, it's about waste sector, it's about dairy. So industry, we're talking about green cement, green ammonia, green steel. So the point is that when we are talking about a green tomorrow, we are talking about green energy, not only in the field of energy generation or distribution, we are talking also energy or green energy getting into different sectors, buildings, road transport, waste, agriculture. So it essentially means green electrification of multiple or several sectors which contribute to global warming. And that is what G20 is taking up now. In all Indian cities now, you find all G20 activities. The other day I was in Bangalore, the Prime Minister was there. India is the president of G20, and the next question I will talk to you is, the G20 nations account for 80% of global energy, in fact we heard yesterday, and consumption, and 82% of global carbon emissions. And that is why it can play a really big role, and under Indian presidency, they think that it should play a much bigger role. Given India's G20 presidency this year and its vision of one nation, one grid, coupled with the recent growth budget, which has earmarked funds for completing the second phase of the green energy corridor. This green energy corridor is a very interesting concept. In fact, India completed the first phase. 1/3 of money came from Germany, 1/3 of money came from the states, and 1/3 came from center. But this entire green energy corridor covering 7 to 8 states, the phase 1 and phase 2 is meant to evacuate green energy. That gives a boost for distribution of green energy. And given this background, what are the technological and financial challenges you foresee for the sector, that is the green energy sector in India and the other G20 countries, and particularly now that you are advisor to something called NLDC in India, National Load Dispatching Center. Any advice given your Canadian experience to the Indian industry here? So 2 parts of the same question.
Thanks very much for the question, Upendra. And I think it's very fitting that the theme of this year's G20 summit, hosted by Prime Minister Modi, is looking at the concept of one Earth, one family, one Earth, one family, one future. And I think that ties in very well with this afternoon's panel session as well. So the fit is quite nice. The notion of India's one nation, one grid was really predicated on the idea that you could take India's 5 regional electricity grids and integrate them into one national grid. And that was successfully accomplished back in 2013. And since then, it's been about 10 years now, India has been operating one of the largest, most integrated power systems in the world. And that's really commendable, I have to say. And layering on top of that now is the Green Energy Corridor initiative that you referenced. And that initiative really aims to integrate renewables more fully into India's existing energy infrastructure. And in doing so, that integration is going to help India meet its climate commitments, its Paris commitments, reduce its carbon footprint, and also enable up to 450 gigatons of renewable energy into the grid by 2030. That's an awful lot of renewable power, ensuring that renewable power also gets to more of the remote areas around the country. Now, the second phase, as you mentioned, of the Green Energy Corridor looks to develop even further existing transmission infrastructure and large-scale renewable projects and integrating them further into the grid. Now, of course, this all comes with a very hefty price tag in the order of about $5.2 billion. These dollars are being allocated over a number of years, and they're being sourced both by government and by private investors. But there are obviously technological, like you said, and financial challenges in such a massive operation and scale of this size. And what are some of those? I'd say, first of all, the need for advanced technology is going to be imperative. Things like smart grids and smart meters are going to play a very important role. And also the build out of more transmission lines to ensure that transmission reaches all parts of the country, particularly those more remote regions in India. And also there's going to be the need for more available energy storage systems to manage the intermittent energy supply. And naturally that's going to take a lot more R&D dollars as investments in research and development continue. And of course there's going to be high capital costs associated with these massive projects, both on the transmission side and on the deployment of renewables. And all these challenges, I think, are underpinned by policy and regulatory challenges as well, which are enormous. They're enormous in our country, and I would imagine it's the same here in India. Yet I would argue that analysts and policy experts say that this investment in India's green energy corridor is essential. It's essential why? Because it's going to help India move towards its Paris Agreement targets. It's going to help India reduce its carbon footprint. And it's going to create more secure energy supply for the country. But also, and we can't lose sight of this, it has the opportunity to create thousands of new jobs in the future. It's projected that by 2030, the low carbon technology industry in India could hit $84 billion. And that's certainly a lot of jobs being created out of that. Now, the second part of your question, or the last part of your question, was with respect to lessons learned from Canada's own energy transition. We're nowhere nearly done. We're still in the midst of it. but I think there are some lessons that can be learned and maybe best practices adopted. The first is with respect to really meeting those robust regulatory and policy frameworks. They're absolutely critical because they underpin almost everything from the beginning to the end. Also, India needs to look to ensure that there are appropriate emissions reductions mandates in place. Now, we had those in our province in Ontario, for example, where our government mandated us to completely eliminate coal. And Ontario was the first jurisdiction back in 2014 in North America to completely eliminate coal. And it was not a small task because coal at the time accounted for 25% of our energy supply mix. But we were able to do it, and I think Ontario still resembles a success story in that case and serves as a model for other jurisdictions to follow. And also in terms of centers of excellence for research and development in terms of wind and solar and hydropower, a number of those centers exist across the country. And we've also had over a decade and a half of renewable integration into our grid, so certainly best practices can be learned from there. And also finally, in terms of energy storage, Canada has become a leader in terms of battery storage. Now, all this, I think, is to say that India is certainly heading absolutely in the right direction in terms of the One Nation, One Grid policy and its Green Corridor project, both Phase 1 and Phase 2. And I also think that India can work more collaboratively with not only Canada, but its other G20 partners to ensure a smoother transition to a green economy and its own pathway towards decarbonization. And I think I'll end my comments there.
That's an excellent coverage. And taking further, if we're looking at green tomorrow, the net zero is a big global initiative. Even India has announced that it's going to be net zero by 2070, China by 2060, and most other countries by 2050. Now, my next question will be to Alexander, and we three have something in common. I studied in Canada for 4 years, and both of them were from Canada, Ella and Alexander. The question is, new age technological interventions to boost processes are very critical in the net zero era. More than 137 countries have announced to reach the net zero during this century. How will they have access to required technologies, and how would they finance such new age technologies that will propel the world into a low carbon trajectory? And there is a second part, because Alexander is in Aisha. It says, what role you envisage for Aisha in this regard? Do you think it is time the world has a World Climate Bank dedicated to promote renewable energy and de-risk the projects in the private sector? To you, Alexander.
Yeah, thanks so much, Upendra. So firstly, I think I want to echo the comment on R&D. So in India, for example, just last week, First Solar announced a collaboration with IIT Madras on producing next generation solar cells. I'd love to see this sort of collaboration. Even just 0.1% of India's GDP devoted to R&D. There's so many brilliant Indian scientists, engineers, world-class institutions. I think if they just got some funding for the labs you'd really see the next generation solar cells, batteries, energy storage technologies, electrolyzers coming out of India. So that's something I'd certainly like to see more money for. The other example, in terms of diffusing new technologies, so I'm the private sector specialist, so I might be a little biased here, but I think the private sector is very good at diffusing technologies, particularly in India, where you have a stable financing regime. Where I see a role for organizations like ISA, a lot of countries that we work with, let's say Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Ethiopia, there's a big challenge for financing. And so I've heard people in Nigeria saying, we need something like SECI that's in India to ensure the security of supply. But in the meantime, I'd love to see the solar facility that we proposed. It's going to have an insurance product and a first loss guarantee product. And the first tranche will be targeted toward Africa, $200 million. So we'd really love to see governments and philanthropic organizations step up to fund this solar facility. I think in terms of Climate Bank more generally, I think it's worth remembering, we have the World Bank, we have AIB, we have the New Development Bank. Why aren't they channeling money to climate fast enough? So I used to work for the World Bank Group, and a lot of it is the compliance burden. And I really want to applaud India for a recent pump storage policy that just came out that said, you know what, we're going to have a fast-tracked environmental clearance. And I think, coming from Canada, where everybody has power and we have cheap, affordable power, we can afford to spend 3-4 years on environmental clearances for projects. Countries like India or Ethiopia don't have that luxury. So I think it's really important that the World Bank and AIB and other multilateral institutions, a great example of this is solar, where in India you're expected to build a project in 6 to 12 months. But the World Bank process takes 18 to 24 months. So we couldn't actually invest in solar projects in India because our compliance process was not suited to the Indian laws. And so to me, I'd really love to see multilateral institutions take a page out of India's playbook and find ways to expedite this money toward climate finance. And with that, I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you. Next question to James. It runs. To implement, it's important that, if we're talking about the green tomorrow, we always cite Montreal Protocol, which actually helped mankind to solve one of the problems. And you find that, to implement Montreal Protocol, multilateral organizations had done a country-wise cost-benefit analysis in a highly professional manner. In fact, I remember the cost-benefit analysis for India was done by UNDP. This was very useful in implementing Montreal Protocol. It is said that way back in fact, do you think such a country-wide cost-benefit analysis of energy transition to net zero regime is desirable and doable under the Paris Agreement? Could you throw some light on how Indian industries and industries in LDC countries can access carbon capture, utilization and storage technologies in the global market? The second one is related to your experience, and the first one is a general question.
Thank you, Upendra. Those are two big questions, so I'll do my best to maybe address them sequentially. So perhaps starting with the first question about cost-benefit analysis under, within the Paris Agreement, helping the Paris Agreement. Perhaps to start by saying that as DNV, we publish an annual energy transition outlook, which forecasts how we're doing in our decarbonization efforts towards 2050. And echoing some of the statements made by earlier speakers, the answer is not well. There's still a huge gap that we need to fill in order to meet net zero by 2050. So one of the key findings of this energy transition outlook is that we see that global energy demand is actually starting to flatline, starting to level off, which is one of the key parts of achieving net zero. But when you actually zoom into individual economies, such as India and Southeast Asia, we expect energy demand to continue to increase quite significantly, more than double. And the reason behind that is continued economic growth, massive growth in manufacturing capability, massive growth in population and population wealth. So, we see a very different picture between different countries and different regions around the world. And this has two key points. Firstly, countries that have a relatively stable energy demand, or even a falling energy demand, and a relatively high GDP, need to do a lot more to decarbonize faster. Places like Europe, North America have the capability and need to do more to decarbonize beyond net zero by 2050 in order to offset other countries, other parts of the world that will struggle to achieve net zero by 2050. The second part is that parts of the world are countries like India, Southeast Asia, where there's going to be continued demand for energy growth. It means that there's great opportunities to change how we supply energy in these economies, and to actually, there's a commercial incentive to really grow renewable capacity and other sort of greener technologies and to fill that gap in demand. So it's also a great opportunity. Coming back to the Paris Agreement actually recognizes that every country has a unique situation and is developing differently. And it enables that by encouraging countries to develop their long-term, low-emission development goals, and encourages them to share those, to publish those, to support policy and set future policy goals, and also to encourage industry to dictate how the country will develop. What I'd like to share is, going back to these sort of cost-benefit analyses, these are very important where you see specific industry sectors not able to necessarily deliver profitable or commercially viable opportunities on their own. So a great example of this, we're doing a lot of studies for a lot of countries developing their hydrogen strategies, their low-carbon hydrogen strategies. And the reason that they need these nationwide strategies is because individual sectors are not able to make economic sense on their own. They don't have enough demand. They're not able to consolidate and create an economically viable value chain by themselves. So what needs to happen is you need a nationwide strategic cost-benefit analysis to see how we can pull together different industry sectors to create a full value chain that makes economic sense, commercial sense, to then drive these projects forward. Perhaps jumping now to your second part of your question about CCUS. This is another area where we see, individual sectors, individual companies cannot necessarily drive this commercially by themselves. So you need to consider sort of nationwide cost-benefit analysis of the technology. Now I know carbon capture, utilization and storage has very mixed reviews and opinions around the world. We feel as DNV that it's very important, at least in the intermediate period, in order to prevent stranded assets and in order to help decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors as we move towards increases in renewables, increased electrification, et cetera, et cetera. So carbon capture has a place to play in our decarbonization roadmaps and our energy transition. When it comes to technologies, and turning specifically to countries like India, where we're looking at the different technology options, there's essentially three things to consider. Firstly, we need to consider cost, then we need to consider scale, and finally we need to consider decarbonization impact. Cost is relatively straightforward to understand. Essentially, the cost of emitting carbon needs to become more expensive than the cost of capturing it and storing it or utilizing it. Sequestration has a problem here because it's just a pure sunk cost. It's always going to cost you money to sequester because you're basically capturing carbon. You need to do something with it. There's no economic value generated by doing that. Utilization has the potential to generate economic benefit, which can offset that. But then this brings us to the second point, which is scale. Today, we're talking about tens of millions of tons of CO2 being emitted by industrial clusters around the world. And if you want to capture and do something with tens of millions of tons, current utilization technology is not really sufficient. It's scaled very low. The volumes of carbon, CO2 you can absorb by utilization technology is relatively low, at a commercial level at least today. Sequestration is able to accommodate those tens of millions of tons, but of course then you run into the cost impact. And then finally, we talk about decarbonization impact, and this is an important one, and it's a bit tricky, but a lot of the utilization technologies people are talking about today, like methanol, e-methanol, it's not necessarily decarbonizing, because what you might be doing is capturing CO2 emissions, turning them into e-methanol, and then when you burn that methanol, you release the CO2 again. You're not actually permanently removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So this again is where things like sequestration are able to demonstrate long-term, permanent storage of CO2, whereas some of the other technologies may be absent. So final point from me, I promise, and then I'll shut up. Final point is about what can the government in India, for example, do? And again, what should be done in India to move this forward? So first of all, we need very clear government policy. And the reason behind this is you need to make the cost of emitting CO2 higher than capturing it. And this could be done in a couple of ways, either directly through carbon tax or through reducing the cost of carbon capture through subsidies, or it can be done indirectly, which is what we've seen with most CCS projects around the world, where the government essentially refuses to allow projects to proceed unless they do something with the CO2. So it's like a opportunity cost of not doing CCS. The second part of it is really about scale, and here what we need is collaboration. So we need multi-sector collaboration. What we see in various parts of the world is start to look at industrial clustering to bring together different CO2 sources together. You start to see sharing of resources between different sectors, like the oil and gas sector sharing the capability to use their sequestration sites with other industrial clusters. And then the third point is about technology. And here probably the most needs to be done to reduce the cost of capture technology. Today, it can be very expensive to capture CO2 from industrial output. You're probably talking around $50 to $80 per ton. We need to scale that technology to bring down that cost to make it more attractive to do carbon capture. Thank you.
Thank you. And another major initiative for the green tomorrow is, of course, e-mobility. And Jose has done something wonderful, this thing. So this question will be to Jose. E-mobility is a major driver of the world's clean energy transition. Numerous companies and inventors are coming up with solutions which promise to take this industry to the next level. Given your experience in this sector and the similarity of the Indian and African markets in terms of opportunities it provides, what do you think are the major challenges in scaling it up, and what is the way forward?
Thank you for the opportunity and for the honor of being invited to speak here, and I hope I can share some information that is useful to the business community here represented in the room, and also provides actually an opportunity to some of the great industrial businesses in the automotive and in the energy sector here in India. So for those who've come into the room since my introduction, we build motorcycles, electric motorcycles. We also build battery packs in East Africa. We're really targeting the 100 to 150 cc motorcycle segment, which is about 80% of the world market for motorcycles. In particular, what we offer is a battery as a service solution. So if you will indulge me, please imagine for a moment that every motorcycle in India, going through every small town, village, city, instead of having that silvery engine block in the front, has a big yellow square box, and that's a battery pack. So that's what we're doing, and that battery pack can then be swapped out and removed in 2 minutes at swap stations that are manned by human beings. And so we're really targeting more this commercial heavy-duty sector, not the lighter scooter type of business model where India is already very advanced and has done very well, but actually the sort of backbone commercial motorcycle. In particular, 90 to 95% of fuel sales to motorcycles globally are to this high heavy-duty segment. Not so much the commuters, but really, in particular, these motorbikes that run 130, 150 kilometers per day. I think India has an opportunity to make a really unique contribution to this. Firstly, almost all the motorcycles sold in Africa come from India. Currently, the motorbikes that we get are also not compliant with any of the Bharat standards. They're particularly polluting as well. I'm actually on this trip here to meet with 3 of the large Indian motorcycle OEMs because there's a real opportunity here. Typically what we see and we've seen in India is that the automotive sector starts at the very high end. Cast your mind back, if you will, to 2009 when Tesla put on the road the Tesla Roadster. Suddenly electric was sexy. George Clooney was driving one. Things looked very different and dorky before that, if you're old enough to remember. But that's the way it usually starts, and it works its way down. If you think of a Hershey's Kiss, if you're from America, or maybe a Buddhist stupa, if you're from India, they're really at the peak, and it works its way down to the big fat base over generations. What we set out to do was to put the first mass market electric vehicle on the road and go straight to that segment, and so that's why we ended up in East Africa, because you have 5 million motorbike taxis operating in East Africa, which make up 60% of all vehicle traffic and a large proportion of fuel consumption we really went for that low-hanging fruit. So I would also urge you to look not just to the premium segments for finding the customers that can benefit most from going electric. The other big opportunity I wanted to mention, since we've got two representatives here from the ISA, International Solar Alliance, a lot of Africa, as you know, doesn't have good, affordable grid electricity. A lot of it does, but there's still about half of the market that doesn't have that. And so there's an opportunity there to come and provide behind-the-fence CNI solar, behind-the-fence PPAs to get this fleet electric. And I think that's my time.
Thank you. Now I can understand you're electrifying the entire East Africa's, two-wheelers and four-wheelers. That's good. Now, before I move to David, I have a question for the audience. Anyone among you who uses a solar watch, wristwatch? Could you please raise your hand? Because that is the green tomorrow, right? You should use solar watches. Nobody? Well, we decided to give a prize of 100 rupees. Nobody gets? Fine. I go to David. David,
I need to give the watches.
You do? Okay, you get 100 rupees. David comes to India, I'm told, twice each month, because I was surprised to find his involvement with Indian Oil, with Mahindra & Mahindra, with the Tatas, with all sorts of companies, because they are doing some new technology called, you explained that. Now the question is, Israel has been globally acclaimed as a master of technology. In fact, when Prime Minister of India went there, he took some 20 secretaries along with him to study most departments in Israel and come back. And could you throw some light on how Israel plans to have a fair and just energy transition and energy security? Do you have any policy support in boosting manufacturing of PV cells? What Indian industries and industry in Israel can learn from each other, and how best technologies can be accessed from and for each other?
Yes, thank you for the questions. I like statistics and numbers, and I try to listen and learn, and I think even during this conversation I already learned something. We were given like 4 minutes each to talk, and the definition of 4 minutes varies. This is what I learned today. It varies from US to Rwanda to whatever. So now I don't know how much time I will talk, but after my 4 Israeli minutes, I will finish, and hopefully it's less than 20. Now, I'm always glad to speak in this type of events, and I try to think what may be something. I usually try to have simple goals, something I can achieve. So I'm thinking about having something crisp, message, and something everybody can remember over time. So my message, and it's a message everybody knows, I think we need to stop dirtying the planet, because cleaning it is a lot of work. So we should stop and dirtying the planet. The second thing is that we need to remember this over time. Because after this type of events, everybody reduces their consumption or reduces the waste for a few days or a few weeks, and then slowly we go back to where we used to be. It depends on where we are from the consumption point of view. Now, in Israel, we have a saying that if you present a smoking gun in the first set, it will be firing on the third set. So bear with me for a moment, and I want to present a smoking gun. This is plastic. You cannot hear it, maybe you can. This is plastic. And this plastic, when we speak, depends where I speak all over the world, we say it is pollutive, it is killing the fish. In India, maybe it's killing other things, and maybe the cows, and you see it all the time everywhere. I'm now going to put this plastic in water, and this is the smoking gun. And if everybody stays here until the last question, this smoking gun will fire, I can promise. So, a little bit about what I'm saying and how to put in real life. What I say is don't dirty, because it's very hard to clean later. One part will be with this plastic, and you will see. The other part is I'm the CEO of Phinergy. Phinergy is a high-tech company, clean tech company based out of Israel. And what we do is we know how to extract energy from metals. Basically, what you see here, or what you think you see, is aluminum, is a metal. But what I see here is energy. And Hindalco from the Aditya Birla Group, who are very big and are producing a lot of aluminum coming here from the ground, knows that. So what we know how to do is how to take these electrons in a clean, safe way, coming from here, from the ground, completely indigenous India, and to make it into electrons. And this is a big game changer, because typically we are used to doing things like coal or photovoltaic or solar or lithium or other things, but here really everything can come from the ground, can be utilized, and the ecosystem is existing. And from that point of view, we, as rightly you said, we were working a lot below the radar because it's not easy to work in a very high profile. But we aim to replace diesel generators. This is a reality. This is something we are doing. And just yesterday, we signed here with Indus Towers to replace 20,000 of diesel generators running here. And this will clean the air tomorrow morning if we want. This is possible. This is technology that is already working and just needs to scale up. And even from here, I call the Chief Minister of Delhi and the Governor of Delhi to support this cause, and we can clean here the air in Delhi, because I don't know if you noticed, but it is rather hard to breathe outside, and we can support it with what we do. My 7 minutes, I see, has passed, but let's wait for the smoking gun for the third question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? We will take up 2 questions. Wes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Zainabi, a 19-year-old climate action advocate from Delhi, India. So thank you so much, first of all, for having this conversation, as I feel that it is really important, wherein we have already predicted that 2024 is going to be the hottest year humanity has faced. So my question to you is, in order to have a clean energy transition, we do need climate finance. And when we talk about climate finance, 100 billion goal is always a huge issue, which is promised by the developed countries to the developing world. But as we are seeing these days, this issue has largely been sidelined. And even at COP27 last year in Egypt, while observing various negotiations, I felt that this issue was again avoided. Why are we making new negotiations and policies while we are not focusing on the existing ones, whether they are being achieved or not? So my question is, what according to you should be the strategy as well as the efforts from the developing world in order to accelerate the achievement of the 100 billion goal? Thank you.
Well, I think unfortunately we live in a world where we have to operate within the constraints of economics, political will, and I think that's why we did what we did. We said, look, we just have to make it cheaper and better, make the electric option, the clean option, a no-brainer. And I think from the perspective of the international finance community, that needs to be very much targeted towards the low-hanging fruit. And so I think there are low-hanging fruit, and I think that will be the thing that gets the ball rolling. And indeed, Africa alone has been promised 100 billion a year, and that's never materialized as well. I think also, we have an opportunity with the G20 coming here. I was actually at COP26, the one before, where unfortunately India made Alok Sharma cry because of the words phase down instead of phase out. But I think there's just such a colossal contribution that India can make to providing the solutions that the world so desperately needs. And there's a massive investment opportunity there. So I think pitching it as an investment opportunity rather than as a cost to the global north, I would say is probably the way to their hearts.
Yeah, I think absolutely there's a huge opportunity. So RE plus storage, for example, is now cheaper than coal in India. Electric vehicles are now cheaper to operate than fossil fuel vehicles in India. So there is an investment opportunity there. There are a couple, policy measures, countries like India, so for example, the taxes on storage is 18%, whereas the tax on coal is 5%. So I'd love to see those, level playing field for RE versus coal in countries like India. But I think there's also a huge responsibility for developed countries to make it easier for them to invest in developed countries. And I'll give the example, when I went to Kanpur, I took the train because they had the Vande Bharat. And the Vande Bharat is fantastic, and I'd love to see way, way more of that. And people will take the Vande Bharat, they'll take the train instead of the plane if it's convenient and if it's fast, which it is. And so we need 100 of these instead of, the 10 that we started with, right? But when I was at the World Bank Group, there were discussions to get funding to fund more of these high-speed trains. But it's like, well, you got to do this compliance process and that compliance process and this environmental clearance and that and this and that. And then eventually India just said, you know what, we can't wait. We can't wait for you to give us this money. And so I think it's really important that we reform, as a developed countries reform how they think about the barriers they're putting up to transferring this money to make what are economic investments in electric vehicles, in high-speed trains, in renewable energy, and so on and so forth.
Well, friends, I think I had some 15 minutes of reserve, and we have spent time from that. So now I request the panelists to give that 1-minute message, how to make the tomorrow really green, and I would request Maria to start the 1-minute message.
Thank you. So I think the 1-minute message actually highlights the question that we just heard from the audience. I believe that we cannot solve the problems that we have and that we're facing without keeping not only in our minds the youth and the next generations, but by holding them next to us and making them parts of the solution. When we do that, not only do they inspire us, bring us energy, but also brilliant solutions, and they make us accountable. They hold us accountable to to the work that we have to do.
I would have to say that I have to really applaud Prime Minister Modi for this position on lifestyle for the environment, and the more mindful utilization of how we use our energy. And some would argue that that is grounded perhaps in Hinduism and in a Gandhian appeal, so to speak. But I would suggest that that kind of appeal is very necessary, and I think it's going to resonate as he takes his G20 partners to the summit. And I certainly hope that this notion of this symbiotic relationship between humans and nature continues. That I think the Indian culture has it right. We do have a responsibility to protect our natural resources and to use those resources sustainably.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we have a lot to learn from each other. I mean, so for example, in Canada, we leave our ACs on. And so I'm trying to train my parents to turn their ACs off when they're not in the room. At the same time, in India, people don't eat leftovers. So I'm trying to train my in-laws to get comfortable with eating leftovers. But how many people here, aside from me, took the metro today? Anybody took the metro today? Yes, one. Okay, excellent. So I think absolutely we should be imploring people, encouraging people to take the metro. But I think also as developing countries, we need to plan the infrastructure to make it more convenient, because it's hard to take the metro in India, where it's not always convenient, it's not always easy, there's not always a sidewalk to the metro. But at the same time, we also need to be asking developed countries to say, where's the funding? Where's the funding to build these metros at the rate we need to be? And whether it's metros, whether it's EVs, whether it's green buildings, I think we need to make good individual choices. We need to make good use and good planning in developing countries, but we also need to see the funding flow faster and more furious from developed countries.
Yeah, lots of very good points made already. It's been a fantastic session. I guess my message, summarizing message, is that every market's different. There's not different countries don't have, it's not one average decarbonisation globally. Each country needs to be taken on its own merits and look at the decarbonisation pathway that makes the most sense for that country. but we do need to move faster in all these countries. We need more technology, more in cross-sector collaboration to make that happen. Yeah, I think I've seen so much exciting messaging coming from India over the past. I've been here for a week. The messaging has been really exciting, but more needs to be done to move that forward. Thank you.
I would just, emphasize that about 3 kilometers. I think it's that way is the Parliament building, and about 3 kilometers that way you have enough. You have so little air that you start to get cold and not enough to breathe. That way, I think 12 kilometers is the airport. 12 kilometers up, your body is dying and it's minus 50 degrees. 120 kilometers that way, it's the foothills of the Himalayas, and then if you go up that way, you're heading to the International Space Station. So just really want everyone to internalize just how thin the atmosphere is, and how really there just isn't room for and we have to work within that constraint as well as the politics and the economics to get the job done. But the good news is that there are opportunities out there that are very much low-hanging fruit. We can make every motorcycle in Africa fully electric for less than 1/4 of the money that's spent in a year on fuel sales and motorcycle sales. So there are good news stories out there. I think those are the thin end of the wedge that are going to get us the result. Thank you.
I think it's a difficult question to answer, and I really agree with what some of the people said, that every geography is very different. It is very easy to manage things on your personal household, and maybe not as easy to manage things like Israel, 10 million people only, and extremely difficult to manage here when 1.5 billion people. So it's like not a fair question. But as I am seeing things from the Israeli point of view, living there, etc., so I think the answer is, if we want to make a change, it will come only from technology. And we look at technology, and we look at from the energy per se point of view. There's many technologies and very good technologies out there. As I said, lithium, hydrogen, etc. People ask me, but what is the best one? I say the answer not as loud, as I don't want many people to know the answer. The answer is all of them. It depends what you want to use. But in India, what I feel can promote going to the next level fast enough is, I would say, in general, people are risk averse. And this is a problem, and you need to take the risk and move forward. One example I will give from my home country, as being in the Middle East, we don't have water, drinking water. I mean, there's not enough rain. This is true to all of our neighbors, including Israel in the Middle East. And through technology, now available, of course, worldwide, but 25 years back, through desalination plants, today, 90% of the water is coming from the ocean, so there's no problem. The problem is solved. The same for energy. Israel has no oil at all. And we are a big exporter of energy through technology. This is what I believe, because technology makes things affordable for everybody and can make the change, especially here in India.
Well, thanks to ET, and thanks to all my panelists. We now declare the closure. Thank you.
I just promised a smoking gun, so 1 second, please. One last thing. I have put here inside plastic. If the camera can come close, I don't know if it can. This plastic is high-tech plastic. This is plastic coming from Israel, which is completely biodegradable. This is what I say by, please don't get things dirty. It is hard to clean them.